Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, you're in for a treat. What if Naruto's Kakashi found love in an ANBU mission gone wild? Well, today we dive into an exciting fanfiction story that explores just that, a whole new side to Kakashi you've never seen before. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. But before we jump in, I have a small favor to ask. I'm on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers as soon as possible, and I need your support to get there. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Your support really means the world to me. Also, huge shout out to zariah.kellie for writing this amazing story. You can find more details in the description and pinned comment below. Now, let's dive into Kakashi's wildest ANBU adventure yet. Kakashi was perched on the roof of a building, scanning the village streets below, his body blending into the shadows cast by the fading light of dusk. Konoha's streets were quiet, but his senses told him something was off. There was a weird presence down there, fast and silent, moving through the streets. Kakashi narrowed his eye, trying to catch another glimpse. There, a quick flash of movement darting between buildings, moving with grace and evading all the passerbys swiftly, like a cat. Curiosity piqued, Kakashi moved across the rooftop, following the figure from above, staying hidden. The figure, small and light, moved with the kind of grace you'd expect from an animal, slipping through the narrow spaces between buildings with fluid grace. Whoever it was, they were quick, and their steps made barely any sound. Too quiet, not normal for a villager. Maybe she was a secret ninja cat? Kakashi thought. He stayed on the rooftops, trailing them silently from above, his curiosity growing. As they reached a narrow alley, the figure came to an abrupt halt, their whole body tensing like they'd caught a scent or heard something unusual. They know I'm here, Kakashi realized. He stayed still, waiting to see what she'd do. The figure scanned the area, turning around to look at the spot where he had been a moment ago, only to find it empty. Clearly surprising the presence by his sudden absence, Kakashi made his move. He dropped down silently in front of her. The figure whipped around, not expecting the quick movement, and before either of them could react, smack, she crashed right into him. Kakashi barely felt the impact, but the girl stumbled back and landed on her but with a soft thud. She blinked up at him, wide-eyed and completely stunned, her breath caught in her throat. Her green eyes were as wide as the full moon, and practically glowing in the fading light. For a second, she just sat there, frozen, staring at him in shock. Kakashi blinked too. Okay, not a cat. Definitely a girl. But what really caught him off guard wasn't the fact that she was a girl. It was how cute she was. Up close, her light brown hair was messy, falling around her face in soft, wild strands, and her wide, big green eyes looked up at him with a mix of confusion and something else. Curiosity, like a small, startled forest creature. A fawn, maybe, or one of those tiny rabbits that didn't know whether to run or freeze. The girl didn't move, sitting on the ground and staring at him, her mouth slightly open in surprise. She looked like she was ready to bolt at any second, but curiosity was keeping her in place. And then, she made a sound. A low, soft noise, almost like purring. Kakashi's brain scrambled for an explanation. Purring? Humans don't purr. Except, his ninkin did. The dogs purred sometimes, a sign of trust or calm. He just stood there, blinking, completely baffled. Am I hearing this right? The girl kept staring at him, her eyes still wide, as if waiting for him to respond. When he didn't, she let out the sound again, louder this time, like she was asking, "Do you get it?" Kakashi crouched down slowly, bringing himself to her level. He tilted his head, still unsure of what was going on. Then, without thinking too much about it, he did what his ninkin had taught him. He let out a small, hesitant purr, except his purr was, well, not great. It wasn't as natural or animal-like as hers. He had definitely not used it on another human before. The girl's eyes went impossibly wide. She blinked at him in pure shock, like she couldn't believe he had just done that. As if I'm the weird one, Kakashi thought. Her posture shifted slightly, less tense but still wary, like she was debating whether he was a strange new creature or someone she could trust. She seemed frozen, staring at him like he had spoken, never seen a boy before. Her body relaxed just a little, the tension easing from her shoulders, but she was still wary, like she wasn't quite sure what to make of him. Kakashi, for his part, was still trying to process what had just happened. Am I seriously purring at this girl who just fell on her, but in an alley? Slowly, the girl pushed herself up off the ground, her movements still cautious but more curious now. She dusted herself off, her clothes, simple village-issued ones, looking out of place on her. They didn't quite fit, like they had been given to her without much thought. She was still watching him carefully, her head tilting slightly in curiosity. Kakashi stayed where he was, still crouched, still watching her, and just as confused as before. His ninkin had taught him how to approach wild animals, to stay calm, no sudden movements, and to let them come to you. So, he stayed still, his eye carefully following her every move. The girl hesitated again, her fingers twitching slightly before she reached out toward him, her hand hovering near his wrist. She didn't touch him right away, just let her fingers hover there for a moment. Then, she lightly brushed her fingers against his wrist. Kakashi blinked but didn't pull away. He waited, still crouched, his brain trying to keep up with whatever bizarre situation he had found himself in. What is my life right now? When Kakashi didn't move or pull away, she grabbed his wrist more firmly, her grip light but insistent. Kakashi blinked. Without a word, the girl gave his wrist a small tug. Kakashi, caught off guard, stumbled slightly as she pulled him forward. Wait, am I being led away by a purring girl? Is this kidnapping? She started walking quickly, pulling him along with her. Kakashi, still processing everything, followed without resistance. What the hell is happening? She kept glancing back at him every few steps, as if checking to see if he was still there, her eyes sharp and focused, like she expected him to disappear. They moved through the alleyways, twisting and turning as the girl led him deeper into the quieter parts of the village. Kakashi, for his part, was just trying to keep up with whatever strange situation he had found himself in. And why is she not winded at all? For her part, she wasn't running in panic anymore. She was just running. Suddenly, she let go off his wrist and let out a small, playful purr, her eyes flashing with something that almost seemed like excitement. Is she trying to play? Then she sped off. Kakashi found himself following her blindly, barely thinking, just keeping up. Okay, so we're running now. Together, I think, thought Kakashi. She turned corners sharply, but with a playful bounce in her step, her movements quick and unpredictable, seeing if he'd trip or falter. Every twist and turn felt like a challenge, as if she was teasing him. Can you keep up? Finally, after a few more turns, the girl slowed down and stopped. She let go of his wrist and took a few steps back, her eyes still on him, watching his every move. She wasn't nervous anymore, but there was still a hint of uncertainty in her playful stare, like she was waiting for him to do something. Kakashi scratched the back of his head awkwardly, his confusion reaching new levels. What just happened? He blinked at her, trying to make sense of the whole thing. The girl tilted her head again, letting out another soft purr, but this time it was almost like a tease, as if she was waiting for his next move. What are you? He muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head again, letting out one last, soft purr. What is with the purring? Kakashi thought, his mind racing to catch up with his body. Humans don't purr, he reminded himself again, even though she clearly just did. Kakashi stared at her, his mind spinning, when the girl took a step back and tilted her head at him again. Her eyes were still playful, as if daring him to make a move. But when he didn't react, she let out a soft huff, almost like she was disappointed. And then, just like that, she turned and started running again. And then, just like that, she turned and started running again. Wait, hey, Kakashi called out, but his feet moved before his mind could catch up. What am I even doing? He shot after her, his body moving automatically as he followed her through the winding streets. She was fast, not like a ninja, with precise, controlled movements, but more like something wild, unpredictable. She used the buildings like playground equipment, turning corners with unnecessary flips and bounding off random walls. Is she parkouring? Her bare feet barely made a sound on the cobblestone streets, and every time Kakashi thought he was gaining on her, she darted around another corner or slipped through an impossibly narrow gap between buildings. This is harder than catching Tora, That demon cat. Kakashi vaulted over a low wall, feeling pretty good about himself, until his foot caught on a loose tile. He stumbled, arms flailing to keep balance. He managed to recover, but not before his knee nearly kissed the pavement. He scowled under his mask, mentally cursing the stupid tile and the fact that he almost face-planted. She glanced back at him over her shoulder, her wide green eyes flashing with playful mischief. As if she saw his near fall, she let out a quick, breathy sound, a kind of short, playful purr, and then picked up her pace, practically bouncing as she darted around another sharp corner. Oh, now she's playing me. Kakashi huffed in exasperation, swerving to avoid a stack of crates that suddenly materialized in his path. Why am I doing this? He pushed himself faster, determined to catch up as she darted ahead, her pace quickening as if sensing his approach. He was closing the gap, ducking under a laundry line like it was some sort of ninja test. When she glanced back again, her eyes went comically wide upon realizing how close he had gotten. She let out a startled eep, completely ungraceful, and shot off like she'd just seen a ghost. Her feet barely seemed to touch the ground as she kicked into an even higher gear. This doesn't feel like a pursuit. Is this tag? Kakashi, not about to be outdone, sped up too, dodging past yet another obstacle. Was that a stray chicken? His mind reeled as he tried to process what was happening. I can't catch her. How is she so fast? They finally reached the outskirts of the village, where the buildings started to thin out and the streets became quieter. The girl slowed down, her playful energy still there, but something in her posture had shifted. She wasn't trying to outrun him anymore. Kakashi kept his pace steady, not wanting to scare her off again. When he caught up to her, she was standing at the edge of a small clearing, just beyond the last row of houses. Her eyes were still fixed on him, but there was something different in her gaze now, something quieter, almost thoughtful. Great. First we play tag, and now I'm being judged by a purring girl. They stood there in silence for a long moment, the sounds of the village behind them fading into the distance. Kakashi didn't know what to say. He wasn't even sure what he was supposed to be thinking anymore. What now? The girl took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was testing the ground beneath her feet. Then she let out another soft purr, this one different. It wasn't playful anymore. It was almost calming. Kakashi blinked, taken aback. Wait, why does that sound comforting? She moved a little closer, just a few feet away from him now, her eyes never leaving his. Kakashi stayed still, not wanting to startle her. He could see it now. Up close, the girl really did move like an animal. But there was something else in her gaze, something deeper, like she was trying to understand him just as much as he was trying to figure her out. They stood there for a long time, neither of them speaking, the only sound between them being the distant hum of the village and the soft rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Finally, Kakashi broke the silence. What do you want? He asked quietly, not expecting an answer but hoping for something. The girl blinked at him, her green eyes searching his face for a moment. She tilted her head again, considering him, and then, to his surprise, she took another small step forward. Her hand, small and delicate, reached out toward him, fingers hovering near his mask. She didn't touch him, but her fingers stayed just inches from his face, as if she was trying to figure something out. Kakashi's breath hitched slightly. Is she? Before he could react, she pulled her hand back, thankfully. Instead, she let out a soft, tentative hum, less of a purr, more of an apology. Her green eyes locked onto his, as if waiting for a response, for some sign that she hadn't crossed a line. Kakashi remained still, watching as she took a small step back, her eyes never leaving his. He realized then that she had wanted to remove his mask, but she had stopped herself when she noticed how his body tensed, how his shoulders stiffened ever so slightly. Smart, he thought, a flicker of respect forming in his mind. He stood there, feeling a little self-conscious for the first time in a while. My mask? He had worn it for so long, it never even crossed his mind that it might seem odd to someone. But now, with the way she stared at it, as if it was the strangest thing in the world, he felt oddly exposed. The girl stood taller, tilting her head, studying him in that same strange, animal-like way. Then, she made a sound, a soft, hesitant hum. It wasn't quite a purr, more like a gentle, testing noise, like she was experimenting. A new sound? Is she testing me? Kakashi blinked, trying to figure out what she was doing. When the hum didn't seem to have the desired effect, her brow furrowed slightly, and she shifted tactics. She made a new sound, this time a low growl, then a soft whistle, followed by a chirp. Each sound was so perfectly mimicked that Kakashi had to blink twice. Is she making animal noises at me? Her sounds and movements seemed purposeful. The girl huffed softly, her lips pressing into a tiny pout of frustration as if to say, "Ugh, this guy's broken." Clearly, she wasn't getting through to him the way she had hoped, but she wasn't giving up. She glanced at his face again, her eyes locking onto his mask for a brief moment, but this time she didn't reach for it. Instead, her gaze dropped down to his hand. She glanced at his fingers, then back at his eyes, as if asking for something. Kakashi tilted his head slightly, confused. She wasn't using words. Maybe she didn't know any. Slowly, with more confidence now, she raised her own hand and lightly tapped his fingers. Kakashi's breath caught slightly, but he didn't move. She wasn't tugging him to follow like she had before. Instead, she placed his hand palm up between them, her fingers brushing against his. Kakashi blinked, his brain scrambling to catch up. Am I supposed to do something? Is this a secret handshake? She didn't wait for him to react. Her fingers moved softly over the lines of his palm, tracing them with delicate, almost curious precision. It was strange, strangely peaceful, and for the first time, Kakashi didn't feel like he was supposed to do anything. She wasn't threatening him, wasn't trying to pull him into another chase. She was studying him, trying to figure him out through touch, through instinct. Kakashi stayed still, letting her explore the interaction in her own way. Her fingers were light and deliberate, moving with a calmness that seemed completely at odds with how fast she had been moving earlier. She's so gentle. The girl let out another soft hum. He could feel the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. There was something almost comforting about the simplicity of it. No expectations, no words, just quiet curiosity. The girl tilted her head slightly, her eyes flicking up to his for a brief moment, as if waiting for approval. What is this sudden desire to pat her on the head? He didn't know what she wanted from him. All of this, her sounds, her touches, it was so unfamiliar. He had no idea what was happening, but it wasn't bad, just weird. Kakashi watched the girl continue her strange, delicate exploration of his hand. Her touches were so deliberate, and now she was mixing them with specific sounds. He had spent years on missions, reading between the lines, deciphering body language, and picking up on the smallest of clues. It hit him suddenly. Maybe this wasn't just some random gesture or odd behavior. His mind flashed back to the sounds she'd made earlier. The hums, the purrs, the animal-like noises. They hadn't been random either. They were too precise, too practiced. It wasn't like she was incapable of words. It seemed more like words were foreign to her. She was using what she knew, sounds and touch. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed in thought. He knew his Ninkin communicated through subtle cues, body language, and simple gestures. The girl wasn't so different in that regard, except she was human. She's trying to make herself understood without words. He realized, she doesn't know how else to talk to me. The determination in her eyes was clear as she shifted her approach once more. This time, she started using her hands differently. Her movements were cautious, as though she expected him to understand what she was trying to say. It wasn't the formal ninja language of hand signs. It was something more instinctive. Okay, first tag, now charades. Kakashi had been trained to deal with all kinds of situations, but this? A girl making animal noises, testing him with weird gestures, and purring? I've faced S-rank criminals with less confusion, he thought. She pointed to the ground, then to the sky, her fingers moving slowly and deliberately. She gestured to herself, then to him, made a small circle on her open palm, and followed it up with a running motion. Is she asking me to race? He was just about to nod, thinking he'd take her up on the challenge, when she repeated the hand movements again, this time with more focus. Kakashi tilted his head, still unsure of what she meant, but when she let out a soft hum, tilting her head as if to ask, "Did you get that?" Something clicked. Oh, not racing. She circled her palm again, looking at him with even more intensity. Together, cautiously curious, Kakashi nodded and gently reached for her wrist, imitating the way she had touched him earlier. His fingers brushed against her skin, and when she didn't pull away, he tugged her into a slow jog. They moved together across the clearing, not fast, more like exploring? Yeah, exploring sounded right. He turned his head to look at her, raising an eyebrow in question. Is this what you wanted? The girl's response hit him like a bolt of lightning. Her face lit up in a wide, beaming smile. It was like someone had turned on the sun in the middle of the night. The uncertainty vanished from her eyes, replaced by pure, unfiltered excitement. She let out a delighted, breathy sound, something between a laugh and a hum, and immediately picked up her pace to match his, her bare feet moving effortlessly against the ground. Kakashi blinked, struggling to process the sheer amount of enthusiasm radiating from her. Is this what real happiness looks like? They slowed down as they reached the other side of the clearing, near the forest's edge. The girl came to a stop and turned her attention to the trees, her expression softening. She gestured toward the forest beyond the village walls, her hand sweeping toward the distant trees. A low, calming hum escaped her lips as she pointed to herself, signaling that the forest was where she was safe. Kakashi tilted his head. The forest? He pointed to her, then the forest, mimicking her hum. You live there? She nodded eagerly, her smile brightening as she placed her hands flat on the ground and slowly raised them to the sky, as if signaling peace or safety. She let out another safe hum. Kakashi scratched the back of his head, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over him. He repeated her gesture, mimicking the way she had pointed to the forest and made that peaceful sound. So, that's where she feels at home. The girl's smile grew even wider, her expression glowing with happiness that he had understood. But then her face shifted, becoming more thoughtful. She pointed to herself again, then to the forest, her eyes turning back to him with a questioning look. Kakashi blinked. Is she asking me to go with her? She made the same small circle on her palm, her eyes full of hope and curiosity. Kakashi's eyes widened. She is asking me to go with her. He paused, glancing back toward the village behind them. He wasn't sure what to say, but the answer came naturally. He pointed to himself, then toward the rooftops in the distance. Mimicking her gestures, he placed his hand on the floor, raising them to the sky and made the same calm, peaceful hum. My home is back there, Kakashi said softly. Nice. I'm also a genius at charades. The change in the girl's expression was immediate. Her bright smile melted away, replaced by a deep, profound sadness that Kakashi hadn't expected. Her wide eyes dimmed, and her lips trembled slightly as she glanced from him to the forest, then back again. Her shoulders sagged, and she looked as though she might burst into tears at any moment. Her lips curved downward into a sad, almost heartbroken frown. The quick change caught Kakashi completely off guard. Whoa, wait, what? Kakashi's mind scrambled, trying to understand the sudden wave of pure, unfiltered sorrow she was radiating. Is this what real sadness looks like? The intensity of her expression hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just any sadness. It was the kind of sorrow that seemed to wrap itself around her entire posture, making her shoulders sag and her eyes glisten. It touched something deep in him as another image reminded him of something familiar. She looks just like Shiba when he doesn't get his treats. An idea sparked in Kakashi's mind. Maybe Shiba could help. Quickly, Kakashi brought his hands together, forming the summoning seal. In a puff of smoke, a small figure appeared at his feet. Yo, Kakashi. What's the... Shiba stopped mid-sentence, his lively eyes catching sight of the girl immediately. His tail wagged once, but then paused, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Hey, who's this? Kakashi crouched down next to Shiba, his voice low. Shiba, I need your help. I think you might understand her better than I do. Shiba tilted his head, his sharp ears flicking toward the girl. Huh, she smells like the forest. The girl, who had been watching Shiba with wide, fascinated eyes, slowly crouched down to his level. The sadness on her face wasn't completely gone, but her curiosity was starting to peek through. Progress. Shiba, with his naturally friendly and lively nature, didn't hesitate for long. He padded over to her and nuzzled his head against her hand. The girl's eyes lit up, and she let out a soft, tentative hum. The corners of her mouth lifted ever so slightly into a faint smile, the sadness not completely gone, but now mingled with something warmer. Hope. Shiba barked happily. She made a few more soft noises, and Shiba's tail wagged in response. The girl, gaining confidence, gently petted Shiba's head, her movements more assured now. She made a few more of her soft noises, her gaze locked on Shiba as if he was the most fascinating thing she'd ever encountered. Shiba's ears perked up, and his tail wagged even harder, his enthusiasm contagious as he barked again. Kakashi watched the interaction closely, feeling his eyebrow twitch. That actually worked? Kakashi watched the interaction between the girl and Shiba closely, feeling his eyebrow twitch. That actually worked? Kakashi leaned in, his eye narrowing in curiosity. What is she saying? Shiba's nose twitched thoughtfully. She says the forest is her home, and she doesn't get how you live in such a smelly place. Oh, and she's curious about you. Kakashi's eyebrow shot up. Curious about me? He watched as the girl gave Shiba a particularly good ear scratch, like she was reading from a manual titled, How to Charm a Dog in 10 Seconds. Shiba, the traitor, was clearly loving it. His tail wagged even harder, if that was possible, as the girl giggled softly. Seriously? I have never gotten this response. Shiba barked again, clearly enjoying this a little too much. Yep, curious about you. But she thinks I'm easier to understand. Kakashi felt his other eyebrow twitch. Easier to understand? Was Shiba mocking him? His gaze darted back to the girl, who was now giggling softly. Shiba nudged her hand playfully with his head, and she made another small, gentle noise, like they were having the best conversation in the world. She's really trying to understand you, boss, Shiba said, sounding both impressed and curious. She has never actually communicated with someone so similar to her. He turned his head slightly, as if asking a question with his tone. Kakashi sighed quietly. So similar? Does she mean another human? His gaze softened as he saw the now gentle look on her face. She feels more at ease with Shiba. Shiba glanced up at him with a smirk, or as much of a smirk as a dog could manage, and then back at the girl, who was now sitting cross-legged on the ground, fully engrossed in her new friend. Am I jealous of my ninkin? Kakashi scratched the back of his head, feeling a wave of awkwardness wash over him. Right? Kakashi muttered to himself, trying to pull himself together. He pointed toward the village, then at himself, repeating the earlier hand signs she had used for home, village. The girl momentarily pulled her attention away from Shiba, followed his gestures. At least she's still listening to me. Her lips pressed together in a small frown, thoughtful, as she glanced between Kakashi and Shiba. Slowly, she raised her hands and gestured toward the village again, her movements more deliberate this time, her eyes flicking back and forth between the two of them. The earlier excitement had faded, replaced by a quiet determination. She repeated the same motion for home, her gaze steady. Kakashi's eyebrow lifted, watching her closely. What is she? She's trying to say something, Shiba murmured, his nose twitching. Then, to his utter surprise, she opened her mouth. The sound that came out wasn't like her usual hums or purrs. It was quiet and raspy, almost like she hadn't used her voice in years. I.e., she struggled 3E. Kakashi's eye practically doubled in size. Did she just say home? His visible eye widened, and for a split second, he forgot how to breathe, trying to wrap his mind around the sound. It was strained, but it was a word. A real word. Shiba's tail wagged, clearly impressed. Not bad, kid. Encouraged by their reactions, the girl smiled, a small, shy smile, and repeated, H home. A little clearer this time, pointing to him. Kakashi crouched down lower, his heart doing that weird fluttery thing that was both confusing and endearing at the same time. Yeah, he said softly, nodding in encouragement. Home, i.e. He pointed to the village again. Village. Sato. Her eyes flickered with recognition. Too, she repeated, softer this time, her voice still scratchy like a kitten's first meow. Kakashi's heart might have melted a little. Okay, this is actually kind of adorable. Feeling the moment, Kakashi gave her a thumbs up, but her reaction was not what he expected. She stared at him with that same bewildered look she had earlier, like he'd just pulled a rabbit out of his ear. Oh, right. She's never seen a thumbs up. Lowering his hand quickly, he coughed awkwardly into his fist. Moving on, the girl pointed at him again, her voice still rough around the edges. Home. Village, she whispered. Shiba, wagging his tail happily, nudged the girl with his nose. She's learning fast, huh? He barked in approval. Kakashi felt a weird mix of pride and shock bubbling up inside him. He scratched his head awkwardly, feeling a bit like an over-enthusiastic teacher. She was talking. Well, sort of. But then she pointed toward herself again and gestured to the forest, her brow furrowing. Her lips moved, but the word she wanted wouldn't come. Her eyes darted back to Kakashi, filled with that unmistakable look of, "What's that word?" Kakashi blinked, realizing she wanted to know the name of the forest. He felt a little embarrassed, unsure why teaching her basic words like a parent to a child felt so strange. A purring sound disturbed his thoughts. She was practically purring in a emoji. Kakashi chuckled softly. Not bad. Close, but not quite. He gave her a small nod, his voice gentle. Emori, he repeated, pointing again, making sure to really emphasize it. Her face brightened even more, a strange mix of triumph and excitement. Mori, she managed, her voice still raspy, but filled with the kind of pride only a child feels when they've finally gotten something right. She looked at Kakashi, her wide eyes practically begging for approval. Kakashi smiled under his mask. That's right, forest, the girl beamed, practically bouncing on her toes as she repeated the words over and over again. Home, forest. Shiba, who had been watching the whole interaction with his head tilted in amusement, barked happily, wagging his tail. She's like a little puppy learning how to bark for the first time, he quipped. Kakashi couldn't help but laugh, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. Is this how people feel teaching? He glanced down at Shiba. I've never had to teach someone to speak before. Shiba barked again. Well, you're doing great, boss. And look, she's not sad anymore. It was true. The girl's earlier gloom had all but evaporated, replaced by an infectious, childlike joy as she repeated her new words like treasures. But as Kakashi watched her, something else tugged at his senses, a shift in the air. His body tensed, instincts flaring. Something's coming. He straightened slightly, his eye narrowing. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but there were others nearby, closing in fast. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the world cloaked in darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of the village's lanterns in the distance, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing. The girl, still in her world of Mori and IE, didn't notice the fast-approaching presences. The girl, sharp in her own way, picked up on his sudden change. Her chant stopped mid-word. Green eyes wide with confusion, she glanced up at him, her entire body coiling in a familiar tension. Before Kakashi could say a word, she darted behind him, peeking out from his side. Her playful energy had completely evaporated, replaced by something primal, fear. Her slightly crouched posture, though. She's not hiding. She's preparing to run. Kakashi realized. Kakashi stayed perfectly still as two masked figures emerged from the shadows, their steps soundless but deliberate. The first one wore a fox mask, his presence commanding. The second, with the tiger mask, hung back slightly, his stance more rigid, colder. Hatake, Fox-San voice was measured, but it cut through the tension. She's coming with us. Kakashi felt the girl clutch his shirt from behind at the detached tone, and Kakashi heard a soft, almost inaudible hum escaping her. He glanced back at the girl, but she was trembling, her whole posture wound tight. She's terrified. Fox-San tone sharpened. She's dangerous. We've been ordered to return her to T. Kakashi blinked in surprise. She was already in custody? Kakashi's mind spun. His gaze flicked to the girl. The girl, this wild, frightened creature, had somehow escaped the highly secure interrogation unit. How in the world did she manage that? He glanced at her again, as if trying to reconcile this new information with the gentle, purring creature he had been teaching words just moments ago. She's been avoiding containment and not cooperating. She's a threat to the village. You know the drill, continued Fox-san, taking a step forward. Threat? The girl's soft, anxious purr started again, barely audible. Kakashi shifted slightly, placing himself firmly between her and the ANBU, not letting them see her. They don't understand her at all. Without hesitation, Shiba padded forward, placing himself protectively in front of the girl, a low growl rumbling from his throat as he glared at the ANBU. Shiba, stand down, warned Kakashi before the situation could escalate. Shiba shot him a disgruntled look but obeyed, though his ears remained pinned back in irritation. She doesn't understand what's going on, Kakashi said, his voice low but steady. She doesn't know how to talk. Orders are orders. Tiger stepped forward, his voice as cold as the night air. You're ANBU now, Hatake. You know the protocol. Step aside. Kakashi's pulse quickened, and before he could form a response, his senses flared. Behind, a third figure, Hawk Mask, had silently approached from behind. The girl, still clutching his shirt, didn't see him coming. Hawk's hand shot out, reaching to restrain her. No, Kakashi reacted instinctively, spinning around in a flash. His sharp movement yanked the girl off balance. She gasped as her fingers slipped from his shirt, and she tumbled to the ground with a soft thud. Just as Hawk's hand reached for her, Kakashi intercepted it, gripping his wrist with lightning speed. Perfect way of not escalating the situation. Hawk's hand froze, Kakashi's grip holding him in place. The tension between them crackled like lightning. Don't touch her, Kakashi growled, his voice low, protective. The two ANBU behind him tensed, clearly not expecting Kakashi to stop the move so quickly. The girl sat on the ground, dazed, her eyes wide with surprise. Her eyes darted between Kakashi and the ANBU. But it wasn't long before fear took over. Her breathing quickened and her hands trembled as she tried to push herself up, but she was dazed, overwhelmed. Damn it. Kakashi shot a look at Hawk Mask. She's panicking. Hawk Mask's head tilted slightly, the cold glint of his mask unreadable. His voice cut through the stillness. Hatake, you're out of line. Fox and Tiger had moved closer, their postures tense and ready to act. Kakashi's grip tightened slightly, his pulse hammering. You don't understand. She's not a threat. She's scared, not resisting. Kakashi replied coolly, keeping his body between the girl and Hawk. Hawk Mask yanked his hand back, eyes narrowing behind his mask. You think you can protect her? I'm not trying to fight you, Kakashi said, his voice low. I just want to help her. You know as well as I do that grabbing her like that would have sent her into a frenzy. The girl let out a soft, desperate whine. Kakashi crouched down in front of the girl, placing himself between her and the ANBU. She was still on the ground, her breath shaky, her eyes wide and frightened. He needed to calm her down, fast. Hey. His voice softened. She responded by shuffling away from him, keeping her frantic eyes on him. Right, wait for them to come to you. But he didn't have that much time with the ANBU present. Kakashi's mind raced. She needed something more. Something deeper. Kakashi's thoughts flashed back to his first encounter with Pakin. The little dog had purred, a soft, calming sound, letting him know he was safe, that Pakin was there to protect him. It worked on me when I was scared. Maybe it'll work on her too. Kakashi took a breath and, crouching lower, he let out a small, hesitant purr. It wasn't as natural as hers, and certainly not as smooth as Pakin's, but the sound was meant to be reassuring. The girl blinked, her eyes locking onto him as the purr filled the quiet. Behind him, the ANBU exchanged bewildered looks, clearly thrown off by what they had just witnessed. Did he just purr? At her? Fox muttered under his breath, clearly thrown off by Kakashi's unorthodox method, but his rigid stance softened slightly. Hawk's eyes flicked to Kakashi, the disbelief palpable. Kakashi, suddenly aware of how ridiculous the situation must have looked, felt heat creeping up his neck but ignored it. Okay, yeah, maybe purring in front of your ANBU comrades isn't the coolest move, but there wasn't time to dwell on it. He let the sound resonate in his throat, hoping it would reach her through her panic. The girl blinked up at him, her trembling easing slightly at the sound. Slowly, she let out a soft, shaky purr in response, though still frightened, but her trembling began to subside. Hawk retreated a few steps, the tension in his posture still present but less aggressive. Hawk watched, visibly taken aback by the girl's calmer state, and finally retreated a few steps, the tension in his posture still present but less aggressive. "She's purring back?" he murmured. Shiba padded over to the girl, giving her a soft nudge with his nose, as if to reassure her further. The girl let out another soft purr, calmer this time, but still cautious. Fox watched the exchange, then turned to Kakashi. "Explain yourself, Hatake." "She's scared. She doesn't understand," Kakashi said, turning back to the ANBU, his voice soft to not scare the girl. "She's been living with animals, not people. She doesn't know how to respond to your commands. Let me translate. I can help." His gaze communicated a silent plea for cooperation. Fox Mask hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "Fine, but she's your responsibility. If she bolts, it's on you." Tiger Mask's eyes narrowed behind his mask, his posture stiff. He clearly didn't like the decision. Kakashi gave a small, almost invisible sigh of relief. "Understood," he nodded. Shiba wagged his tail, barking softly. "Wow, boss, you stopped ANBU by purring? Impressive." Kakashi shot Shiba a look, his eye narrowing in mild embarrassment. "Yeah, let's hope this doesn't become a regular thing." He swallowed his discomfort, glancing at the masked figures still watching closely. He could feel their confused stares on him, and the awkward heat crept up his neck. He stood up and offered a hand to the girl, who had managed to push herself up but was still looking around anxiously. She hesitated, her eyes darting between Kakashi and the ANBU. After a moment, she slowly placed her small hand in his. "She's trusting me." Kakashi gently helped her stand, her fingers still trembling slightly. The girl stayed close to Kakashi's side, her earlier panic now just a faint tremor in her hands. Her wide eyes flicked between him and the masked ANBU, distrust and caution still evident in her posture. Kakashi moved his hands, using the simple signs they developed earlier. "Me, you, together, safe." The girl's gaze focused on his hands. She hesitated, her body tensing slightly before a small, relieved hum escaped her. The tension began to ease from her body, though her eyes stayed alert, warily watching the ANBU. "Good. She's calming down." The girl singled at him, at her, and then did the together sign. Kakashi gave her a reassuring nod. She glanced up at him, the flicker of trust growing, and took a deep breath. Her hands stopped trembling, and for a moment, it seemed like the worst of the panic had passed. But then, something unexpected happened. The girl turned to face the ANBU. Her small frame trembled ever so slightly, but her green eyes gleamed with determination. And then, she purred at them. Kakashi blinked. "Wait, what?" The sound was louder this time. A clear, drawn-out purr, almost defiant, like a kitten trying to sound intimidating. The effect? Not quite what she'd expect. The ANBU stiffened, completely thrown off. Fox Mask's head tilted just slightly, as if trying to process what on earth was happening. Tiger Mask visibly faltered, taking half a step back as if he had no idea how to respond to being purred at. Their confusion was palpable. Even Kakashi couldn't believe what he was seeing. "She's purring at them." He felt the urge to put a hand over his face, as the second-hand embarrassment hit him in waves. Oh no! For a long, agonizing moment, the clearing was filled with nothing but the strange, vibrating hum of the girl's purr, mingling awkwardly with the tension. "Please stop, please stop." The girl, proud and oblivious, eventually stopped, only to tilt her head and give the ANBU a tiny, innocent smile. Kakashi's eyes darted between the girl and the ANBU. "She thinks this went well, doesn't she?" He was sure his ears were turning red under his mask. The girl, blissfully unaware of how utterly baffling the situation had become, let out one final purr, this one softer, more like a question. She tilted her head slightly, green eyes wide and expectant. Was she waiting for the ANBU to purr back? Kakashi felt the overwhelming urge to melt into the ground and disappear. "No, no, no, no. Please don't purr back." The ANBU did not purr back. "I think," Kakashi internally cringed, his shoulders slumping as reality hit him like a brick. Maybe I'm not the best role model for normal human behavior. Besides the girl, Shiba's tail wagged furiously. Purring at ANBU? That's a new one, boss. I think she's winning. There was a beat of silence and then SNRK. From behind, Hawk let out a low, strangled noise, a sound that could only be described as a half scoff, half laugh. He had suddenly stiffened, his shoulders visibly shaking as he desperately tried to hold back a laugh. Kakashi flinched and shot a withering glare at Shiba, his face burning with embarrassment. Of all the ridiculous situations, she's communicating, Kakashi managed, his voice strained with the effort of holding his composure. This is normal for her. Somehow, Fox's mask blinked once, then twice, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Probably questioning every life decision that led him here, Kakashi thought. Shifting his attention to Kakashi, Fox finally broke the silence. You think you can handle this? The girl, still looking proud of herself, let out a satisfied hum and gave another soft, final purr. Please stop purring at the ANBU. I really don't need this in my career report. Kakashi sighed, realizing this was somehow his life now. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. Look, Kakashi's instincts flared, and before he could fully process, Tiger moved, his patience clearly snapping. His hand shot out, grabbing the girl's arm with a firm, unyielding grip. The response was immediate and visceral. The girl thrashed wildly, her body jerking like a cornered animal, her eyes wide with panic as a loud, sharp sound tore from her throat. It wasn't just a scream. It was more like the howl of a wounded creature, raw and wild, the kind of sound that cut straight through the quiet night. He reacted on instinct, moving swiftly to intercept, but his hand only grazed the edge of her shirt as she was yanked away from him. The look she gave him in that moment, it cut deeper than any kunai. Her wide green eyes filled with disbelief and a deep hurt that made his chest tighten. The look she gave him was clear. You said you'd protect me. Tiger-san didn't flinch, his grip on the girl tightening as she continued to thrash. She's dangerous, he growled, voice cold and unyielding. This isn't normal behavior. The girl's struggles became more frantic, her small hands clawing at Tiger's arms and her animalistic cries rising in pitch. Her wide eyes locked on Kakashi, pleading, accusing, desperate. She thinks I've abandoned her. Fox's mask stepped forward, his posture tense, eyes narrowing beneath the mask. Tiger, that's enough? Before Fox could finish, Tiger's free hand darted to the base of the girl's neck with sharp precision, pressing down on a pressure point. Her body went rigid, a faint, whimper-like noise escaping her lips before she slumped. Tiger clearly had no intention of catching her, but Kakashi moved faster. He caught her just before she hit the ground, pulling her unconscious form into his arms to prevent her from sprawling on the dirt. Behind him, Hawk-san let out a soft grunt, his disapproval evident in the subtle shift of his posture. He wasn't pleased with Tiger's actions, but neither was he about to argue. This complicates things, he muttered under his breath. Shiba, ever the loyal ninkin, chimed in with a growl. She was just trying to communicate. Kakashi didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the girl's unconscious form in his arms. The weight of her earlier gaze, her hurt and disbelief, still hung heavily over him. She trusted me, and I let this happen. Shiba patted closer to Kakashi, his ears flat in displeasure. She was scared, not dangerous, the ninkin said, his voice low and defensive. You don't treat scared animals like that. She was just trying to communicate. Tiger's gaze flicked down to Shiba, a hint of irritation flashing in his eyes, but he said nothing. Fox, however, let out a quiet sigh, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to ease the strain of the situation. Hawk glanced at Fox. What's the plan? Fox's mask glanced between Kakashi and the girl before speaking. We'll bring her back. Hatake, you're coming with us. If you've figured out a way to communicate, you'll be useful during interrogation. Kakashi blinked, surprised by the offer. Still interrogation? He glanced down at the girl again, her expression peaceful now, a stark contrast to the wild panic from earlier. He gave a small nod, his voice steady as he replied, I'll stay with her. Tiger's eyes narrowed, his annoyance palpable, but he didn't argue. He simply stepped aside. Kakashi's visible eye narrowed as Hawk crouched in front of him, reaching out to take the unconscious girl. His grip on her instinctively tightened, his body curling slightly to shield her from the others. Not again. The thought surged through him like a wave, a sudden protectiveness he couldn't suppress. It wasn't just about the girl. It was about the past, the people he couldn't protect. Obito. Rin. His chest tightened as the memories flashed before him. I couldn't protect them. Kakashi's eye flicked to the girl, her face peaceful now, oblivious to the chaos around her. The sound of her earlier cry still echoed in his mind, the raw hurt in her wide green eyes stabbing at something deep inside him. She trusted me, and I let her down. Just like them. Hawk, still crouched in front of him, hesitated. He could see the unspoken emotions swirling behind Kakashi's mask, the protectiveness, the guilt, the defiance. The infamous Kakashi the friend killer. It was obvious now that the name was completely wrong. Slowly, Hawk extended his hand, a rare softness in his tone. Hatake, Hawk said gently, I'll carry her. Kakashi's jaw clenched. His fingers flexed around the girl's small frame. Can I trust them? His rational side won out as he carefully passed her into Hawk's arms. The ANBU cradled her unconscious form with surprising gentleness, adjusting his hold to keep her secure. As soon as the transfer was made, Kakashi felt a hollow pang of unease settle in his stomach. I'll be watching you like a hawk, Hawk. Just as Kakashi stepped back, Tiger moved closer, his presence looming. Don't let personal feelings interfere with the mission, he muttered, his voice sharp with warning. A wild animal is most dangerous when it's cornered. Kakashi's gaze remained fixed ahead. She's not an animal, Kakashi shot back, his voice icy. Understanding her isn't interference, it's ensuring we handle this correctly. Tiger's posture remained rigid. Our duty is to secure potential risks to the village, he replied tersely. Fox, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes, intervened. That's enough, Tiger. We're not here to make this more complicated than it already is. Hawk, adjusting the girl in his arms, gave a quick nod of agreement. Then, in a completely out-of-character move, Hawk tilted his head, his mask hiding the mischievous smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He let out a soft, exaggerated purr, a mocking attempt to mimic the strange communication that had passed between Kakashi and the girl earlier. It was absurd and awkward, catching everyone off guard, especially Kakashi. Kakashi blinked, utterly taken aback. Did he just? He stared at Hawk in disbelief, his mind scrambling to process the bizarre turn of events. Fox, clearly not expecting that, let out a quiet laugh, his lips twitching beneath his mask. Well, that's a new communication method, he remarked dryly. Perhaps we should all adopt it. Hawk gave a slight shrug. It seemed to help earlier, he said, his tone neutral but with a hint of amusement. Shiba wagged his tail, his eyes gleaming. Purring ANBU. Now that's something I'd pay to see, he chimed in. Fox sighed dramatically. I'm going to have to write a report about this, aren't I? The boss purring should be the highlight, Shiba replied, his tone teasing. Kakashi didn't respond, still processing Hawk's ridiculous attempt at humor. Not exactly the best time to purr at me, Hawk. The absurdity of the situation, the purring, the serious ANBU trying to handle this feral girl, was almost too much for him. He wasn't amused, but the tension eased ever so slightly. Even so, Kakashi couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at him. Something isn't right. His mind raced with questions. Why was she in tea in the first place? How did they not notice she doesn't understand? There were too many gaps in the story, and Kakashi wasn't content to leave it at that. He gave a quick, discreet signal to Shiba, who immediately caught on. Without drawing attention to himself, the loyal Ninkin slipped away into the shadows, moving swiftly to find Minato. If something's off, the Hokage needs to know. Eventually, he let out a long sigh and scratched the back of his head again, his mind still muddled with confusion. Seriously, what just happened? With a nod from Fox, the group disappeared in a blur, using Shunshin to quickly travel to the tea building. With a nod from Fox, the group disappeared in a blur, using Shunshin to quickly travel to the tea building. They reappeared in front of the cold, foreboding facility in an instant, the transition smooth and silent. Kakashi landed lightly on his feet, just behind Fox and Hawk. As they entered the facility, The dim lighting cast long shadows across the steel walls, creating an eerie, suffocating atmosphere. I really hate this place. At the entrance, they were greeted by a man in standard T uniform. His face was hard, etched with lines of impatience, but it wasn't his appearance that caught Kakashi's attention. No, it was the smell. The smell of fear. Her fear. Kakashi's gaze narrowed beneath his mask as he instinctively stepped a little closer to the unconscious girl. This man, he was the one who had been interrogating her. The man barely spared them a glance as he gestured for them to follow. "This way, please," he said curtly, his tone devoid of any warmth or sympathy. His gaze briefly darted to the girl, cold and detached, before he turned on his heel and led them down the dimly lit hall. The interrogator led them through a series of cold, sterile corridors until they reached a small, dimly lit room. The room was small, starkly lit, with the typical sparse setup for an interrogation. Just a table, a few chairs, and nothing else. It was unnervingly clean, the sterile scent overpowering. The air inside felt heavy, stifling almost. "Something is off." Kakashi frowned. His nose twitched. The room. It didn't smell like her. If she had truly been held here, there should have been some trace of her. Her fear, her confusion, her scent. Nothing. No scent. Kakashi's brow furrowed beneath his mask. The girl, still unconscious, was placed in a chair by Hawk, who handled her with surprising gentleness. Her small frame seemed even more fragile under the harsh lights of the interrogation room. She stirred slightly, a soft hum escaping her lips, but she didn't wake. Kakashi moved closer to Hawk, lowering his voice so only the two of them could hear. "Something's off," he murmured. "This room doesn't smell like her at all." Hawk shot him a sideways glance and asked to the room, "This where she was before? Shouldn't we find a place with a cot?" The interrogator, stiff and unreadable, ignored Hawk's observation and gestured toward the door. "This is a restricted session. You'll need to leave now. The interrogation will resume without your assistance." As if, Kakashi took a step forward, his voice cold and unyielding. "I'm staying." The interrogator's face tightened with irritation, his gaze darkening as he glared at Kakashi. "This is a classified operation. Your presence isn't necessary, nor is it authorized." Before Kakashi could push further, Fox cut in smoothly, his tone as calm as ever. "After observing the detainee, it's clear she doesn't communicate through standard human language. That's why we brought Hatake. He's established communication with her." The interrogator's lips thinned into a hard, disapproving line. Clearly, he wasn't pleased with the ANBU's decision to involve Kakashi, but before he could retort, the door to the interrogation room slammed open with a resounding crack. The fourth Hokage stepped in the room, his steps measured and calm. His presence filled the room instantly. Minato's usual warmth and gentle demeanor were replaced by something far more serious. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room quickly, locking onto the girl slumped in the chair before they finally landed on the man who had been interrogating her. Shiba padded beside him, tail low, but alert. Minato's expression remained calm, but Kakashi swore he saw something dangerous flicker in his sensei's eyes. He nodded at Kakashi, acknowledging him, but his attention quickly shifted to the man standing in the room. "Why was I not informed that a young girl was being interrogated in tea?" His voice, though quiet, carried an undeniable authority. Kakashi's heart skipped a beat. He has no idea what is happening. Minato should have known everything happening in the village, especially something as sensitive as a young girl being interrogated by ANBU. The silence that followed was deafening. Hawk stiffened beside the girl and Fox, ever the calm one, shifted uncomfortably. It was clear none of them had expected this question. How had Minato, of all people, been kept in the dark about this? But the real surprise was the interrogator. He showed no reaction at all, his calm facade eerily intact. Tiger, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "She was deemed a potential threat to the village. We brought her back after she escaped." Minato's gaze darkened as he turned to Tiger, his eyes cold. "Who gave the order to bring her here? I don't recall authorizing any such mission." Fox cleared his throat, trying to bridge the tension. "The report came through the proper channels," he said, though there was a trace of confusion in his tone. The interrogator, maintaining his composure, spoke in a detached voice. The situation was handled internally. There was no need to involve. Minato raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. He stepped closer to the man, his expression unreadable, but his presence commanding enough to make the interrogator take a small step back. I want to know why I wasn't informed about this. Minato's voice was ice cold, and for the first time, the interrogator's mask of calm faltered. I was told she was suspected of questionable objectives. It was just a routine questioning, the man answered, fixing his detached mask. Questionable objectives? Minato's tone was cutting now, every word sharp enough to slice through the tension. Who decided that? All eyes in the room shifted toward the interrogator, who hesitated, unsure of what to say. It was clear now that whoever had orchestrated this had gone around the Hokage, and Minato wasn't going to let it slide. Minato's eyes flicked toward Kakashi, his expression softening slightly as he addressed his former student. Kakashi. Kakashi straightened, meeting Minato's gaze. His expression shifted from the concern he had felt moments earlier to something more professional. Time to act like an ANBU again. Hokage-sama, Kakashi began, keeping his voice level. I encountered the girl around 1800 hours. She had apparently escaped from custody by then. Her communication isn't verbal like we're used to. She uses gestures, sounds, and animal-like cues, purring, for instance. He cringed inwardly, but there was no avoiding it. Minato raised an eyebrow, a glint of amusement momentarily breaking through his serious demeanor. Purring? Yes, Hokage-sama. Kakashi fought the urge to groan. This was not going the way he had hoped. I know how it sounds, but from what I observed, she's lived her entire life in the forest. The way she moves, the way she reacts to her surroundings, it's instinctive, almost like she's part of the wild. Minato's gaze softened as he looked at the girl, then back at Kakashi. And you've been able to communicate with her? Kakashi nodded. It's rough, but yes. I believe I was beginning to understand her, and she was starting to trust me. However, his eye flicked toward Tiger, a barely restrained glare burning beneath his calm exterior. After the ANBU's rough handling, that trust may now be broken. His voice dropped, barely masking his frustration. He paused for a moment, then continued, his tone professional once more as he faced Minato. From what I've observed, she's not hostile, Hokage-sama. She's afraid and doesn't understand what we expect from her. If we handle this on her terms, we can avoid further complications. Kakashi took a breath, steadying himself. As for her being held here, this room doesn't match her scent. She wasn't kept here. Something's off. The interrogator faltered for a moment, his posture stiffening. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting to Minato before returning to Kakashi. She evaded containment, escaped multiple times, and showed signs of hostility during her capture. Protocol demands we investigate further. Before anyone could respond, Minato's chakra flared, just for an instant, but it was enough to send a wave of pressure crashing through the room. Though controlled, the sheer force behind it unsettled everyone. Even Kakashi felt his pulse quicken. It was the girl, however, who reacted the most. The girl awoke with a start, her instincts firing. The moment Minato's chakra hit her senses, her eyes flew open, wide and wild, pupils dilating as she scrambled out of the chair with a panicked flail. Her hands shot out, desperately searching for stability, but in her frantic state, she only succeeded in knocking over the chair. She hit the ground with a thud, immediately retreating into the farthest corner of the room, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The girl's eyes darted around the room, every muscle in her body tense and ready to flee. But then her gaze landed on Minato, and she froze. Her breath hitched, the fear in her eyes growing more intense. She could feel it, the raw, overwhelming power radiating from him. Strong. Kakashi stepped forward, his voice soft, calm, trying to reach her. Hey, it's okay. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you. He made the same sign she understood. Me, you, safe. But the girl barely registered him. She was hyper-focused on Minato. The girl was curled into herself, her small hands gripping the fabric of her shirt tightly as if holding on for dear life. Her body trembled with every breath, and a soft whimper escaped her lips. Minato, noticing the girl's reaction, didn't move at first. He kept his posture relaxed, non-threatening, his sharp blue eyes softening slightly. He understood now what Kakashi had meant, She was operating purely on instinct, and his presence wasn't helping. Slowly, he knelt down on one knee, lowering himself closer to her eye level, making himself smaller in her eyes. His movements were measured, deliberate, designed not to startle her. "Easy," Minato said softly, his voice gentle after a whimper left her lips. He let his chakra settle, changing it into a more subtle, calming aura. The girl blinked, her rigid posture loosening slightly. Her wild eyes flickered with confusion as she continued to stare at Minato. His soft blue eyes met hers, and though he was the most powerful man in the room, there was no hint of dominance or danger in his gaze. Just gentle. The girl's trembling began to ease. Her eyes shifted, taking in the way everyone reacted to him. He was the leader here. Strong, gentle, alpha. Her gaze flicked between Minato and Kakashi. Slowly, tentatively, she began to crawl forward on her hands and knees, inching closer to Minato. Her movements were hesitant, like an animal approaching something unknown, but drawn by a feeling of safety. Kakashi's heart twisted at the sight. She doesn't trust me anymore. The loss of trust hit him harder than he expected, but he didn't show it. It was like a knife twisting in his gut. She had looked to him for protection, for understanding, but now, she saw him as part of the danger. He wanted to reach out to her, to tell her it was all a misunderstanding, but he knew that any move he made might just scare her further. Damn it. Minato didn't move as the girl inched closer, his calm gaze never leaving hers. He waited, giving her the space and time she needed to feel safe. His hands rested loosely on his knees, his posture open and non-threatening. She stopped just in front of him, hesitating for a long moment, her eyes flicking up to meet his, still cautious. Minato remained quiet, his blue eyes soft and patient. Slowly, the girl let out a soft, tentative sound, a purr, low and steady, a greeting. Her hand lifted, trembling slightly, as she reached out to gently touch Minato's knee. Of course she trusts Minato, Kakashi thought. His sensei had always been the kind of person people were naturally drawn to. He's always been the kind of person you can't help but trust. Minato didn't just protect people. He made them feel safe, seen, understood, and he didn't fail in protecting her. "Hello there," Minato said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if trying not to spook her. He didn't make any sudden movements. Instead, he gave her a gentle, encouraging smile. With a trembling hand, she pointed to herself, then made the familiar running motion with her hand, and finally, pointed back as if the forest was still behind her. "Me. Run. Forest." Minato's expression softened, but his brows furrowed slightly. Her body tensed, frustration building as she realized Minato didn't understand her. She glanced at Kakashi then, her green eyes shimmering with unshed tears, her body still tense with uncertainty. "Help me." Kakashi, still watching the girl, cleared his throat softly. "She's asking to go back to the forest." Minato let out a quiet sigh, a deep sadness settling into his features. He knew what the girl was asking: freedom, a return to the only life she knew. But they couldn't just let her go. Not yet. "I wish we could let her go back," Minato said softly, his voice laced with regret. "But it's not that simple." The girl watched him intently, her brows furrowing as she tried to make sense of the words she couldn't understand and turned back to Kakashi. Slowly, Kakashi brought his hand to his chest, signaling me, then pointed to the girl, indicating you. He then made the familiar circle on his open palm, the sign for together, before letting out the familiar sound of safe. "Me. You. Safe. Together." But the girl didn't respond the way Kakashi had hoped. Instead of calming, she shook her head, her expression growing more frantic. She backed away, mimicking again. "Me. Run. Forest." Repeating me over and over with more urgency each time. Kakashi's heart sank. She doesn't trust me anymore. That realization cut deep. He could see it in her eyes, how she looked at him like he was no different from the others. Just another threat. The bond they had begun to build, fragile as it was now shattered. His mind scrambled for a way to fix it. Think, Kakashi, think. He had nothing left, no more signs, no more gestures she would believe in. Then, his thoughts drifted to his Ninkin, the way they'd communicate with him, even in the toughest situations. What would they do? Suddenly, Kakashi let out a soft, sad purr. The the kind of sound he had heard his ninkin make when they were hurt or trying to soothe someone. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't enough, but it was all he had left to offer. The effect was immediate. The girl froze mid-gesture, her frantic hands slowly dropping to her sides as her wide, startled eyes locked onto him. She blinked, her breath catching in her throat as if the sound had reached her in a way nothing else had. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths as she tilted her head ever so slightly. She could sense his sorrow, the genuine sadness in his attempt to reconnect with her. For a moment, she hesitated, her body tensing as if she might run again. Kakashi's heart ached, but he continued the soft purr, hoping against hope that she would understand. "I'm sorry. I didn't protect you the way I should have." When her wild gaze and posture softened, Kakashi's hands repeated the motions, slower this time, as if trying to convey his sorrow through every movement. "Me, you, safe, together." The girl's eyes followed his hands. She hesitated for a moment, then she brought her hand to her chest, to his Mori? Her voice was soft, uncertain, as she asked the question, "Together in the forest?" Kakashi's heart twisted. He swallowed, his throat tight, and slowly shook his head. With deliberate care, he made the circle on his palm for together. "Sato, together." His voice was gentle, almost pleading. "Together in the village." The girl stared at him, her lips trembling. "Mori?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Kakashi hesitated. He felt utterly helpless. "Sato," he said again softly. Kakashi watched as the girl's lips wobbled, her whole body trembling with the weight of his answer. Tears gathered in her wide green eyes, glistening under the dim light, threatening to spill over at any moment. It was Shiba who moved first. The ninkin padded up to the girl, his tail wagging gently as he nuzzled her hand with his nose, letting out a soft, comforting whine. He pressed his warm, furry body against her leg, offering his quiet support. She blinked at the dog, her trembling hand hesitating before she slowly lowered it, resting it gently on his head.